docking station. So anyway.
Yeah, I got a docking station too. I got a whole bunch of stuff plugged into it. My Ethernet, my HDMI for my. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm on a totally different camera today. I'm
Oh,
using my
really?
Mac camera today.
Okay.
I just got tired of the whole big DSLR setup and getting the focus on that. I'm like, I'm just gonna. This is 100. This is number 168 live. So I'm like, let's try something new. Let's
I
not
like
go
the
with the biggest.
we, you know what? We should start doing these. You should let me get in my car and drive around for an hour, and I could just, I could go off my iPhone and we could just like go live in Atlanta traffic for an hour.
Well, one of the things I was thinking, and by the way, welcome everybody to Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for November 1st, 2023, as John and I are strategizing how we're going to do our future lives together. Everybody knows this. This is live Q&A. So today is one of the very few days I'm rolling into the live with John. We didn't exchange emails ahead of time to talk about what. You know what I'm doing? I'm actually looking at my DSLR camera. I'm so used to looking at my camera that's over my monitor that I'm forgetting that this is the camera right here, and I'm looking over at that camera like an idiot.
I
Anyway,
like
it's
it.
gonna take a sec.
This live is going to have all the bumps and bruises of live television, right?
It's gonna come across like the very first one that that we did, which is probably a lot more polished than this one. But
Well, no one can say that we're scripted. Those guys are so boring because they're too scripted.
yeah, what I was saying to everybody watching is that we didn't even email ahead of time. I didn't even really think much about the live until I turned it on. I'm like, I don't even know what we're going to talk about. There's
Can
always
we,
something to talk about, but
can we talk
we got
about,
Lynn.
what's really weird, David, is every once in a while I'll get requests from reporters, like 2 or 3 requests from reporters in a really small period of time on the same topic. So it kind of leads me to believe that something happened
Oh,
and somehow some reporter or group of reporters got wind of it and want to write articles about it. And so
you
I
got something
got,
to talk about?
yeah, well, I don't know if I don't know if we've ever talked about deceased indicators on credit reports, but
Oh,
for,
it's a big deal.
okay,
Yeah.
so if you want to, for some reason, I've gotten not a lot. I've gotten 2 requests from pretty well-known media outlets, and both of them in the past, I guess last week I got one, and then I got one today about uh, you know someone who's dead, and they can't convince the credit bureaus that they're alive, and all the problems that they have when with credit bureaus think that they're dead.
That's actually relevant. I don't know. We got about a half dozen people and some more people jumping on. Do you guys want to hear about deceased files? I don't think anybody on here is dead, to the best of my knowledge. But no, John, it's a real thing. In fact, when Credit Versio goes looking for violations, that's one of the number one things that the software is looking for, and it's really obvious too, because you can, TransUnion might say that you're deceased, but you just applied for credit, and we can see that on Experian and Equifax, or your balances are going down. So it's pretty easy to see that stuff. Lynn, my credit score with John, we'll get to that in a second. We got to handle this, man. Experian drops 6 points for a credit line increase. Is that normal?
Yeah. So Lynn, just I wouldn't freak out about a 6-point change in your score. Most credit scores are going to, even though your credit score doesn't actually move over time like a thermometer reading moves over time, most credit scores will plus or minus 20 to 25 points every month, even through your normal organic usage of credit. And so I even though, I get it. Look, 6 points is 6 points, and you'd like to have those 6 points. My guess is if you check your credit report again next month, your score is going to be different again, and maybe you'll get those 6 points back. So I wouldn't, whenever I see changes of scores that are within like a plus or minus 20 to 25 point band, really maybe an inquiry, but otherwise the changes are pretty minimal and pretty irrelevant, and are very, very likely going to be temporary. But certainly no. I mean, look, if I'm reading your question, which is my credit score with Experian dropped 6 points because of a credit line increase. No, that is not something that you would reasonably tie together as one being the cause of the other. Credit line, and I'm assuming you're referring to a credit card credit line increase and not a HELOC credit line increase. But so if you're talking about a credit card credit line increase, your utilization ratio, unless you increased your balances somewhere else, your credit utilization ratio had to go down. It's a mathematical certainty. And your credit utilization ratio going down does not also lead to your credit score going down. And so even though 6 points is a pretty meaningless difference in your score, I want to be respectful of your question. And you wouldn't normally tie the two things together. You would normally expect your score to go up, but remember there are other things that are in motion on your credit report at the same time, which net resulted in your score being different by 6 points the second time you checked.
I think also too when people try to like self-diagnose why their score moves and the movement is really insignificant, John, and Lynn, this is for you. What John was talking about a second ago is what we refer to as score migration, which is just the normal up and down and up and down. Like if I were to pull up my Experian report on here, and there's a place where you can go and look at your score graphed over time, it does that. It's just 20 points, 40 points, 30 points, 20 points. It's all over the place. And for me, as it is for a lot of people, as a general rule, it has to do with your credit card balances, unless you're applying for something new and maybe the age of accounts dropped a little bit. But I always tell everybody, especially when they're going through the repair process, there's nothing to be concerned about as far as an abnormal score migration until you're outside of what that threshold usually is, which is about 30, 40, 50 points. And then you can start looking at your credit report like, okay, what did I do? What changed? But anything under 20 points, John, I always tell everybody is just like what you said. You'll check your credit report in 30 days. You'll probably have those points back or something pretty close to it. So it's not worth getting too excited about. Okay, great question though. All right, let's. Okay, we got Jones real quick, and then we'll go on to the deceased part because this is good information right here. What does descriptors listed on your credit report have been updated mean?
Well, there can be any number of descriptors listed on a credit report. There are in Jonas. So if you're not familiar with kind of the credit reporting nomenclature, there's a language that all companies that furnish information to the credit reporting agencies have to use, and that language is called Metro 2. So if you ever hear people talking about Metro 2 this, Metro 2 that, they're referring to the language that furnishers use to communicate with the credit reporting agencies. And within Metro 2, in the Metro 2 guide, it's actually a booklet, is over 350 pages long, and so there's a lot of code that goes into constructing a consumer's credit report. So there's a lot of those codes that add context to the information on your credit report. There are special comment codes, consumer information indicator codes, compliance condition codes, payment rating codes, etc. I mean, I could go on for the rest of our time here this evening, but I'm not going to bore you. Every single one of those codes are generally and kind of universally referred to as either narrative codes or descriptors, meaning that all they do is add some sort of context to the information on a credit report. So I think what you're referring to there is that one of those codes has been changed or has otherwise been removed or added to a credit report. And by the way, I saw the thumbs up thing just happen. That is an iOS. I found out that is an iOS thing. It's not a David thing. It's not a John thing. It's not an eCam thing. It has nothing to do with the system we're using. Apparently, the iOS on my Mac is smart enough to see my hand motions and do those stupid graphics in the background.
Oh, is that what's doing it?
Yeah, I thought I had turned it off.
Oh.
They're called reactions, and they.
Oh, I thought somebody was just giving you a thumbs up like they're watching the.
No. they're called reactions, and to use a dirty word, it really pisses me off that Apple has just assumed that it's okay that they throw that crap up. I mean, I could be in the middle of trial testimony, and and if I'm speaking like this to a jury, and all of a sudden balloons and fireworks go off, or thumbs up go off without me even asking it. So I actually have to go in every time I use my camera and affirmatively turn off reactions.
Oh gosh.
Which I just did, by the way. And so you shouldn't see any more graphics behind me that kind of unsophisticate our time here this evening.
I never thought it was unsophisticating our time. I always thought people were just giving you props.
Yeah, that's not what's happening. I used to think it was a Zoom setting, and there's some setting in Zoom that people can do that kind of stuff, but it is actually a iOS reaction setting, and it's just like the volume or your light brightness on your computer. You can actually shut off the reactions now. I guess I'm going to have to do it every single time I go on some sort of video.
Yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
I know that's more than the people watching wanted to know, but if you're wondering why in the world you Apple users are seeing that below, it's because you have reactions on.
John over here going all Ricky Bobby on us, not knowing what to do with his hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. The guy keeps pushing his hands down. Deji, I saw your comment. If you want to ask a question, just throw a question up. I'm not sure if there was a question in there or not, other than just yeah, I'm bummed to hear that you lost 68 points because of that. That sucks. Let's see. Greg with a question. Does adding comments to your report ever really matter, i.e. late account, and you explain why? Great. Well, we haven't had that question in a long time. That's a great question, Greg.
Yeah. What you're referring to is it's called a consumer statement. And by the way, it's your right to add a 100-word consumer statement to your credit report, unless you live in Maine. And if you live in Maine, you can add a 200-word consumer statement to your credit report. Let me tell you what the consumer statement is. Do you remember, David, in the first Twitter version 1 where you could only 100 words? It was a really small, and then they started making. Okay, so the consumer statement is Twitter before Twitter was Twitter, which means that you could jam in an explanation about something on your credit report in a box that would only hold 100 words. So it really made people, you had to be very creative with your explanations of things to add them to your credit report. So, and you've had the right to do that since before I was in the credit industry, which predates 1991, which was probably before some of you were born. So this right to add a consumer statement is decades old. And so it kind of predates credit scoring, and it certainly predates most automated underwriting systems that exist in today's world. And remember, there was a time, believe it or not, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, where a lender would actually print out your credit report and read your credit report and share it with the person sitting next to them and ask them, what do you think about this? Should we do this? Should we not do this? And that's when the consumer statement really mattered, because you could see, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this guy went through a bad divorce, and this is really his ex-wife's debt. And he's just, so the consumer statement used to have much more importance than it has today. So, to answer your question, credit scoring systems don't consider consumer statements. They don't help your score. They don't hurt your score. If a lender is using an automated underwriting system like Fannie Mae's DU or Freddie Mac's LP or any of the other automated underwriting systems that are used, that are pretty ubiquitous in consumer credit these days, that they may be able to see if a consumer statement is present, but certainly it can't read it and understand what the consumer statement is. Now, let me tell you and I've attended, David and I have attended credit repair conferences, me for the better part of the last, 15 years, probably David longer than that. But here's what I have heard at these events. This isn't John's advice. This is what John has heard at these credit repair related events that I've gone to. I've heard from professionals in the credit repair, world that you should be careful with your consumer statements, because you may inadvertently validate something on a credit report that and that may actually work against you if your efforts are to try to get that item removed. And I'll give you an example. So if I add a consumer statement, hey, this late payment or this collection on my credit report, seriously, the dog ate the bills, and I went blah, 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 blah. So basically, I've just kind of validated that, A, it's mine, and I really didn't pay it. And so, so that's what I've heard as a just kind of an interested observer at credit repair related events as it pertains to these consumer statements.
Yeah, I've heard that a couple times before. I'm not sure how, that might be one of those things that's on the lines of, you know, write your letters in blue ink or something like that. Does it ultimately matter, or is it a hypothesis? Is it just an idea? I know most of the guys that own big credit repair companies in the U.S. You know this, John. We all know each other. We all go to the same seminars. We largely use a lot of the same compliance attorneys. We're all part of the same compliance groups for the most part. We're maybe one person away from knowing everybody in the space, and I don't think I've ever heard that as like a legitimate, like a real concern when leaving a comment. So I could be wrong. I don't know. It's not something I thought was a big deal. Drake Hen with a question: do credit bureaus feel more pressure as rounds of disputes increase? I don't know. Is that? I mean, you were dispute resolution in Equifax.
That's a fair question.
I was going to say that's not really a credit repair question per se.
No. I think that's inbounds. I would suggest to you that they do not, and here's why I think that. The statistics about consumer disputes are all over the place. The CFPB published a report, which I call the green paper, because they have green graphics, or their branding. The CFPB's branding is green, so I call it the green paper. And they indicated that the credit bureaus, and this is an old paper, it's about 10 plus years old, that the credit bureaus receive 8 million disputes a year. There's other more recent data that indicates that that's not even remotely close, meaning that a single credit bureau gets more than that every year. So we're talking way more than that. So, and the point I'm trying to make is that don't think of any of these big companies, whether it's credit bureaus or debt collectors or banks, as like human beings and me and you. And I see, oh my gosh, Dre, this is the third letter Dre sent. He must really be serious. I don't think that kind of reaction occurs when a credit bureau receives a dispute, whether it be letter or telephone call or via the internet. And certainly they keep a record of consumer disputes. Not only do they keep a record of consumer disputes, but they also image your documents that if you choose to send a document like a dispute letter or some sort of a justification to your dispute, they certainly image and keep all that. So there's a record of all of those disputes occurring. But I've never gotten the indication I've never gotten the indication that the credit bureaus somehow do things differently just because it's the second dispute or the 10th dispute of an item. In fact, for those of you who are familiar with the Credit Repair Organizations Act, there comes a time where the credit bureaus can legally ignore disputes if they deem them to be frivolous or there's no new information that is accompanying the dispute. So I don't know that more pressure is the way that I would phrase it. That's a good question. That's a fair question.
Yeah, Dre, my experience with this in about 11 years in specifically the credit repair space is that you can't really project like a human feeling onto the bureaus, especially these are big institutions, and they definitely want to resolve the issues. Really, what people are usually trying to say when they ask a question like that is, well, what happens when I'm escalating a dispute to another round? All that it really is that perhaps the issue wasn't resolved in the first round or the second round, and you have to add clarity, or maybe there's a new error that's found on the credit report. There's no real pressure that the bureaus are feeling, like John was saying. It's just more, okay, maybe we have to dig in a little bit more to this, or he's expanded the question a little bit more, or maybe there could be a handful of reasons why they might investigate things slightly different depending on what's in the dispute letter. But and then I see you circle back around and says, meaning when the CFPB and the Better Business Bureau get involved. The Better Business Bureau, that's kind of, you can pretty much throw that one out the window. That's not a regulatory agency. It's just a nonprofit with a very dodgy reputation, I might add. But the CFPB, that's a different story. I mean, that is the regulatory body that oversees the financial industry in the U.S. specifically. The credit bureaus are, they're always in the crosshairs of the CFPB in some form or another. All right, James. Can John accidentally leave the magic removal form on his desk, then casually walk off screen so we can copy his answers asking for a friend?
I've one of the so for those of you who've watched me and David talk, or for those of you who've ever followed my writings, you know that I'm pretty aggressive with the I don't do credit repair angle, and that's authentic. Nobody will ever find any document that I've ever written, and I've written a lot of documents in my days, where I'm teaching a consumer how to get something deleted from their credit report, other than hey, here are your rights, and here's the process at the credit bureaus if you choose to leverage your rights. And plus, I live in Georgia, and credit repair is illegal in Georgia, so I couldn't do it even if I wanted to do it, because I don't want to go to jail. But yeah, I've been around the process for 3 decades, so I kind of feel like I know how it works. And I know you're joking, James, but I get the idea that there is no such thing, that there is no magic letter, and there is no magic wording, and there is no magic.
But John, I did see somebody standing in front of a Rolls Royce that said that they had the magic answer. Everything deleted within 24 hours.
Now is that Dave, the bureau killer?
No, this is somebody else.
Right. So I stand corrected. Dave, the bureau killer, who stands in front of a car he doesn't own, parked in front of a house where he doesn't live, on a block where he doesn't even know the zip code. Those are real letters. So those are, in fact, the magic letters to get anything removed off your credit report within 24 hours. Good stuff. That's good stuff. I'd like to see these letters.
Hey, he could tell us, but then he'd have to kill us. All right.
We're really ripping on Dave, the bureau killer. I'm sure he's going to get sick and tired of that eventually and lash out.
Well, it wasn't Dave. It was really a crazy name like Jaquandre or something like that. I can't remember what it was. I've since deleted that comment on our YouTube channel. Jonas, so when we start getting into specific credit repair tactics, it's not something we really do on this live with John. So you can do one of two things. Actually, you know what you should do is send that over to support@creditversio.com, and Travis will get that. Travis is awesome. He's more than happy to answer that question for you. This one, we haven't seen this one in a while, John. Does opting out of marketing solicitations from the big 3 really raise your score any, as some claim? Love it. Greg, you are like 2 for 2 tonight.
Greg is like the guy who replaced Adolis Garcia in the Rangers lineup last night in the World Series. The guy was 2 for 2. So, yeah. So, all right. So that's a pretty common, what I call social media myth, where you do see that a lot on TikToks, you do see that a lot on Facebooks, and you do see that a lot on Instagram, and YouTube, where there's this, and I honestly have no idea what the genesis of this is. Normally, these myths have some root in reality, and it's just a misunderstanding, or there's a plausible explanation. as to where that comes from. This really doesn't have one. What you're asking is, Greg, is that if you sign up to opt out, which is your right. So in other words, so if for the folks watching, if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, let me tell you what I'm talking about. The next time you get a pre-approved offer in the mail, a credit card offer, not an invitation to apply, but one of the offers that says you have been approved for up to this amount of money, that's called a pre-approved offer, and they have to offer you the credit card issuer has to make you what's called a firm offer of credit. If you read the back of those solicitations, usually the small print at the bottom, the micro print, you'll read a disclosure, and the disclosure will explain how you can opt out of having your credit report data screened any longer and sold by the credit bureaus for these firm offers of credit. That process is referred to as pre-screening, and so the process of getting out of it is opting out of pre-screening. And the website that I believe Greg accurately put in his question, optoutprescreen.com. There's also a toll-free number, but optoutprescreen.com is the single required by the FCRA website where you can opt out, and the bureaus can no longer sell your credit reports after they've been pre-screened and it's normally a credit card issuer, but home equity lenders will do pre-screening as well. So one of the rumors is that, well, if you opt out, then your credit, but I've seen it way more specific, Greg. I've seen your credit score will go up 5 points, your credit score will go up 7 points. So there's like a very exact figure that's being pimped by people with respect to opting out. Here it is, the truth bomb. There's nothing on that list that David has on the screen right now that indicates if you opt out, that it's going to have any influence on your credit score. Opting out doesn't fall under payment history, amounts owed, new credit, types of credit, or length of credit history. So I've heard the counter argument, which is, well, hold up. If I opt out, then the inquiries that are left behind by the pre-screening can't end up on my credit report and therefore can't hurt my credit score. All right, fair enough. That's a fair retort. So here's the counter offer or the counter retort. Pre-screen inquiries are soft inquiries, which means that they're not seen by credit scoring systems, which means they have no impact on your score. You could have 1,000 of them, and a lot of people do, and none of them are seen by credit card issuers. None of them are seen by lenders. None of them are seen by credit scoring systems, so they have no impact on your score. But that's not really the argument. The argument isn't, oh, my credit score won't be lowered by these inquiries because they won't exist. The argument is that, well, your score will actually affirmatively go up because you have opted out. So I generally don't go too deep into FICO scoring models kind of behind the curtain because I acknowledge that there's certain things I'm not allowed to talk about because I used to work there. I'm quite certain they would be okay with me saying there's nothing in their credit scoring systems that rewards you in a binary fashion. Yes, you've opted out, give them 10 points. No, they haven't opted out, withhold those 10 points. So no, you can certainly opt out. You'll certainly reduce the amount of credit card offers you get because they'll basically dry up. Your mailbox will be much more empty than it might be today, but your credit score will not go up because of it. Now, if your credit score is 700 today and you opt out and your credit score is 7010 tomorrow, you're going to correlate your higher score with the fact that you've opted out. Don't fall into that trap, okay? Don't be like Dave, the bureau killer, and start making YouTube videos. Your score went up, but it went up for some other explainable reason having nothing to do with the fact that you have opted out. But awesome question.
Yeah, and here's what I was going to throw up before you just gave that example is, like, I'm not picking on Lynn at all. This is a perfectly reasonable and rational position to have, which is, oh, I opted out. My score went up 5 points. Therefore, it's a false association where, oh, it must be as a result of this. And then that gets in the blogosphere and that gets on YouTube and Instagram. And pretty soon it becomes one of those things where people believe that's what it does. It's kind of like, not to open up this can of worms, John, but like when we did that video with Steve Rieger, where we had to thoroughly debunk Metro 2 disputes, one of the things that both you and Steve said is like, well, if you would have written the dispute on a cocktail napkin and sent it in, you would have gotten some kind of result if there were things on the credit report that were either outdated, unverifiable, or incorrect, or whatever. So it doesn't mean that you should start selling that cocktail napkin in your dispute on it. It just happened to be what worked at that moment in time, just like Metro 2 letters, or just like writing a letter to ink. There's just because one thing worked, it could have worked. You could have done it a million different ways, and it would have had the same outcome. All right, what do we got here? Are we caught up? James, like, did I just start a gang fight? We'll need a little bit more incentive for a gang fight there, James. But
look, if there really is somewhere out there called Dave the Bureau Killer, what's that thing that you see in movies that this is all if any relation to a real person or a real event is coincidental, you
right.
See that movie. If there really is someone out there named Dave the Bureau Killer and he's a member of some sort of a gang, I apologize. I have no idea who you are. I'm not trying to disrespect you or your gang affiliation. Just Dave the Bureau Killer just sounds too good to pass up.
I don't know. I got to pass on that one because it's my name. I don't want people to think you're talking about that might be an alias of mine or something. All right, Dre, back again. Can anyone report things on your credit bureau of a person who has failed to pay a debt? Like, how do you get permission to report something on the bureaus? Oh, that's a good question. John, you know a little bit about that. Back from you had didn't you travel around for Equifax, or am I thinking about FICO?
I mean, I traveled for both companies. This is really more of an Equifax question than a FICO question.
Well, for sure, yeah. I just couldn't remember which one you had to qualify. Because I remember we talked one time about what does it take to be able to report to a credit bureau, and I can't remember if you were the guy that went out there and talked to companies about that or not.
Yeah, no, it's first off, number one, consumers don't have a right to a credit report, and number two, companies don't have a right to credit report. If I hope I made that distinction clear. One was a verb and one was a noun. So to report something to a credit bureau is a privilege, not a right. So just because I start a bank, or just because I start a collection agency tomorrow, or just because I start a mortgage broker company tomorrow, which would be a really bad idea right now, that doesn't mean that I can call the credit bureaus and say, hey man, I want to hook me up with some credit reports. That's not how it works. It's not how it works, I can assure you. In order to, you can apply for an account with the credit reporting agencies, and the credit reporting agencies will then consider your application just like any company considers anybody's application or any company's application for anything. And you have to pass certain qualifications in order for the credit reporting agencies to approve your application. Now, the credit bureaus are not dumb, okay? There's been a lot of people and a lot of companies that have tried to game the system and fool them and try to pretend like they were a lender, or pretend like they were a mortgage broker, or pretend like they're a debt collector, or pretend like they're a tenant screening company and therefore get access to credit reports. But the credit bureaus actually have a process whereby they send out people, like human beings, and they actually do an on-site inspection of the company. And they look for things like signage, business cards. Is there actually a company there, or is it someone's trailer? And so there's a pretty considerable amount of due diligence that goes into the approval process to become a customer of a credit bureau. Now, that's step one. Let's say that you do all that with all times three, because you've got to apply to all three bureaus separately if you want to have relationships with all three. And let's say that you now have an account with the credit bureau. Now you have to decide, what do you want to do? Do I want to be a Do I want to pull credit reports, or do I want to be a furnisher, or do I want to do both? And most big companies are both. Like like Citibank pulls credit reports, and they also report to the credit bureaus. So they are pulling credit reports, and they're also furnishing to the credit bureaus. So they actually do both. You don't have to do both. You can only furnish if you want, or you can only buy credit reports if you want. You don't necessarily have to be a furnisher. So that's step 2. Is you got to decide, what do I want to be? Now, if you start furnishing information to a credit bureau, you got to become really familiar with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, because that's the minute you start touching a credit report, the Fair Credit Reporting Act becomes very important to you. Yes, by pulling a credit report, you also have to comply with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. But when you furnish information, that's also likely going to result in disputes of your information, which means you have to perform investigations. So there's a lot of exposure to liability when you start putting things on consumers' credit reports. So it's not as just simple as saying, well, everybody should just, if you're going to pull credit reports, you should always report to the credit bureaus. There's a lot of liability and costs involved with doing this. So that's number 2. Number 3, just because you have an account with the credit bureau today doesn't mean that you're going to have an account with the credit bureaus tomorrow. The credit bureaus are always looking for bad actors who may have gotten access to their systems somehow. So in other words, some person who used to be a mortgage broker but now is something different and is pulling credit reports under false pretenses.
Yep.
The minute they find that out, they're going to shut you off. And if your business is relying on the ability to pull credit reports, that's it. You're done. And they talk to each other. So if you go to one bureau and you burn your bridge at that bureau, they're going to tell the other 2. All right. So you have essentially been listed, and so you're done. So I like talking about this, because I think a lot of people just think that anybody who owns any company can have an account with the credit bureaus and report information to them. It's definitely much more involved than that.
Yeah, great question. Greg with another good one. Oh, I like this question. This is one I haven't seen.
No, I can't go 3 for 3.
No, that's 3 for 3 for Greg. He's
That's
pulling
it.
off. Let's
change. We're gonna call it Romano the Bureau Killer. That's it. We're changing the guy's name. He's Romano the Bureau Killer.
Yeah, in the hockey, we call this a hat trick. All right. Do credit repair agencies need to have an attorney on staff to be legit? They all seem to tout being an attorney or having one on staff. So I'll give you my 2 cents on that.
Yep. That's a David question.
Yeah. So the answer is no. There's certainly, like, if you want to have a credit repair company, Greg, you have to register not just in the state that you are in, but you have to make sure that you're compliant with all the state and federal laws, all the state laws where you want to have customers. So if you want to have, like my old company, we had to have some contracts that you give your customers are good for multiple states, but you really, especially nowadays, oh my gosh, you don't need to have an attorney on staff. That's not really the way credit repair companies work, but you better have at least a couple of attorneys, compliance and so forth in your back pocket, contract attorneys going through everything that you're doing. As far as the dispute process goes, not really. The dispute process is really not that complicated. Credit Versio, technically, legally, we're not a credit repair company because we don't perform any credit repair service. It's a DIY platform, and we have a legal opinion from a law firm to state that. But still, we have a compliance attorney. We have a compliance attorney for our relationship with our attorneys. We have a couple of contract attorneys. We have an attorney that we work with that sometimes we'll have to escalate, very rarely have to escalate something negative on an account. So having attorneys involved in some way with a credit repair business is pretty common, especially if you're really keen on being compliant. But as far as working in your business and doing disputes, attorneys don't do that. Attorneys don't do credit repair. They want to sue. Yeah, attorneys want to sue bureau because that's where the money is. No attorney worth the salt is going to be, sending out dispute letters. That's just not what they do. Okay, great question. Jones, most of my collections were closed with the first round. Will that continue to hurt my credit? What do you mean by closed? Do you mean removed? Because a collection typically, yeah, I mean a collection has no asset, has no value to your credit score apart. It's no positive value on your credit score. So I'm not sure what you mean. Um, Lynn, when paying off an account, how many points can your score increase? That is a big open question right there. John, you want to try to tackle that one?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, Lynn, when this is going to be one of those it depends types of
Yeah.
answers. It depends on what type of account. And I mean, there's some scenarios, and I'm sorry to keep bringing bad news about lower scores to you tonight, but there's some scenarios when you pay off account, your score will go down. I think, and if you've ever watched any of these live,
Last time we were on.
that's right. If you want to go back, and I don't know if David, if you archive these and they're available.
Oh yeah, everything is just go back to the 2 weeks ago, and we talked about what happens when you pay off installment loans. I think it was a question about paying off a car loan.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lynn, one of the metrics in credit score. So first off, there's this assumption, and it's a reasonable assumption, but there's an assumption that all debt is bad for your credit scores, which is not correct, right? And I think that's because people think that all debt is bad and you shouldn't have debt. But not all debt is bad for your credit scores. So credit scores reward you for properly managing debt. And so if credit scoring models see that you're properly managing debt, they reward you because of it. And if they can't see that you're properly managing debt, then they can't reward you for doing so. So a couple of things. So number one, if you pay off credit card debt, always a plus, right? Your score will not go down because you've paid off credit card debt or paid down credit card debt. Installment debt, so like your auto loans, your mortgages and whatnot, your score may actually go down after you pay it off because credit scoring systems reward you for long-term installment debt management. And FICO has multiple blogs on their website that talks about this. Collection accounts, they're always better to have zero balances for a variety of reasons. And there are some scoring models in some versions that ignore $0 collections. And certainly collections that have a zero balance means that the debt collector is not going to bother you anymore and not going to sue you to collect the debt. So, but generally speaking, it's better to have lower or no debt. Even from a non-credit scoring perspective, I'd love to be completely debt-free. I don't care what my credit score is at that point. It's going to be good one way or the other. Does it have to be an 850? No. Do I care? Not really. I'd rather have no debt. That would be way better because I'm saving a ton of money and not writing big checks every single month. But I mean, it can cut both ways, I guess, is the point I'm making.
Okay, I think we're all caught up on questions. Yep, we sure are. Oh, hold on. Since you mentioned car loans, is a car lease or loan better for your credit, or are they considered the same?
So they're both considered installment. So from that perspective, installment is installment. So there's no net difference. And I'm really reaching deep into the bag now to find any difference between the two. Not always, but it's not uncommon that the balance due on a lease is going to be less than the balance due on a loan, because the balance due on a lease is generally going to be, let's say you're looking at a $50,000 car. Well, if you borrow money to buy that car, you're going to borrow $50,000 or some lower amount if you make a down payment or you do a trade-in. To lease that car, you're not paying $50,000 over 4 years of lease payments. So the balance due per your lease is going to be considerably lower than that. So the balance on your credit report is going to be very different. Having said that, balances on installment or the amount you owe on installment debt is almost immaterial to your credit score. So I would say that generally speaking, while it's always better to have less debt than more debt, it's not necessarily a relevant issue. Now, credit card debt, completely different animal, but installment debt, I wouldn't get too worked up about it.
Yeah, Greg, I have leased probably 4 or 5 cars in my lifetime and bought probably just as many, maybe a little bit more, and I've never really seen much of a difference. But yeah, John's right. Like it's funny you gave that exact example of a $50,000 car. That's how much my Audi was that I turned on my lease. I leased before I moved to Vegas. So it was 54,000, I think, and then the loan amount, because it was through VW Credit, is $18,000. So it wasn't like $50,000 plus tax and license minus whatever down payment I made. It's just it was a total $18,000 balance. But again, it wouldn't matter if it was a $50,000 or $60,000 balance on a 60 month. It would have looked the same on the credit report. Okay, so John, we're coming down to the end of the live. Maybe you want to talk about that deceased. Finally getting to it at the very, very end of the live.
I'm still waiting for Greg to ask another good question.
I know, right? It'll be right when we're trying to get off, and Greg's like, "Listen, you guys, I got one more." He'll pull that Steve Jobs line. There's just one more thing.
That's awesome. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to turn back I'm going to turn the reactions back on. There we go. So hopefully I get some sort of whatever, because I think all the hand figures make these react. So hopefully I get some balloons or fireworks.
Well, I tried my thumbs up, and
that's it. Greg just logged off. Greg just logged off. He's like, I'm quitting while I'm ahead.
Yeah, he's tapping out. He's tapping out. He's going to let everybody else give a shot. No, he intimidated everybody else. So we can't ask a great question, so we're just not going to ask. Although Dre's been actually these are all great questions today.
Yeah. So here's the deal with the deceased indicator. So it's a common practice in the credit world, not the credit reporting world or the lender world, but in the credit world in general, that when a consumer dies, that consumer should not be applying for credit any longer. Duh, right? Because then that would be fraud, because someone's applying for credit in someone's name. And the Social Security Administration has a master death list, which is not 100% reliable, but nonetheless, there are these different methods whereby the credit reporting agencies attempt to determine whether or not somebody is in fact deceased. And if they become under the impression that someone is deceased for whatever reason, then the way that it is normally represented on a credit report is through a code. Remember earlier we talked about Metro 2 and how it's all those codes. There's actually a code that a lender can actually report to the credit reporting agencies, indicating that the account that they're reporting is associated with the deceased consumer. Now, why is that a big deal? It's a big deal for a couple of reasons. Number one, when your credit report includes an indication of being deceased, then that credit report can still be delivered. Believe it or not, it can still be delivered when someone tries to pull it like a lender, but credit scoring systems will not score a credit report that has a deceased indicator on it. So what'll end up happening is the credit report will be delivered, but then it'll be delivered with what's called an exclusion code. And the exclusion code essentially indicates that this credit report has failed the minimum scoring criteria of the scoring model, and it'll list which particular criteria, and it'll say something to the effect of consumer deceased or consumer listed deceased or some reasonable derivative of that term. And so unfortunately, when it works, it's great, because a consumer who's passed away and then their credit report indicates deceased, that means that they can try to apply for credit in their name, but they're not going to get anywhere because the lender is going to see that they're deceased, and number two, they're not going to be able to get a credit score. But there are some scenarios where a consumer, may represent themselves as being deceased to try to get out of paying a debt, or or what. So, there's some scenarios where you can mail a statement as a lender to an address, and then the U.S. Postal Service will return it as being an address of a deceased person. So there's yeah, that's right, and there's a variety, and or the Social Security number maybe on the master death list, which is kind of morbid, but that thing actually.
Yeah.
So there's, unfortunately, and it's not a huge problem, right? It's not like 50% of the population looks like they're dead, but when it does happen, then obviously the consumer may have scenarios whereby they apply for credit, and if they pull the credit report where it has the deceased indicator, then they're not going to get a score. Now they may do what's called toggling, and they may go to a secondary or tertiary credit bureau, and so the deceased indicator may be on one credit report but not on the other two credit reports. So if the lender is standing there in front of them, if I'm standing in front of David and David's like, bro, I'm alive, here's my license, it's really me, I'm just going to pull a different credit report. And if that credit report indicates that you're alive and I see a credit score, then we've moved on, and I've underwritten your loan, and now you have a loan. But it is something that happens. You being that you see a lot of credit reports and can see kind of these aggregate statistics, may have a better understanding of how often this occurs than I would. I only see it when it ends up in litigation. I don't see it from the credit bureaus don't say, hey, John, like 4% of our credit reports have deceased indicator. That doesn't happen. But
we have at any given moment, we've got anywhere from 32 to 35,000 active clients, and we might get a new one of those maybe once a month. So it's very, very, very seldom that we see those, but they do stand out because it is a pretty substantial error.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
All right. I think we're about done. Where are we, John? 52 minutes. Perfect. Right on the nose. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining me and John today. And great questions. Always appreciate good, solid questions. And then, yeah. And if I didn't answer your question, just send an email into support@creditversio.com. We'll answer it for you. And we'll see you in about a week. Thanks again, John. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care, my friend. Bye, y'all.